If you spend 40 years demoralizing people, that it works. And we've spent probably more than 40 years. Since the mid-60s, we've been on a campaign to demoralize people. I think it started with the Club of Rome types who claimed that the world was overpopulated and that we were all headed to hell in a handbasket, and there's no evidence that any of that is true. I mean, the idea was that by the year 2000, everyone would be starving to death and that commodity prices would shoot through the roof and that the planet couldn't tolerate 3 billion people or 4 billion people, and all that turned out to be utter nonsense. We're richer worldwide than we ever were before. There's absolutely no shortage of resources. Commodity prices have gone down. There were world record harvests this year, and all you ever hear is doom and gloom.
Yeah.
You know, and I've been thinking about that a lot, and because I tend to think about things psychologically, obviously, and my sense is that people who want to garner power to themselves use fear. And I think that's how you can tell real leaders from wannabe tyrants, is that if they're trying to terrorize you into granting them all the power, then they're essentially tyrants and not leaders. And you see that happening everywhere. Well, I think there's two things that are happening. Is that the culture war is a war between systems of ideas, and it's essentially a war between the ideas that are part and parcel of the classic Western tradition that's grounded in the biblical corpus, essentially, so Judeo-Christian culture, and the counter-reaction to that, which is kind of what post-Enlightenment Marxism. And so you have a war between two sets of ideas. But then you also have people who are acting directly in, a quasi-conspiratorial manner. The Club of Rome types, for example, from the 1960s, who decided back then that, like as I said earlier, that the planet is going to hell in a handbasket and that something has to be done about that emergency. And so,
and we're the problem.
We're the problem, yeah. There's too many human beings on the planet. That's a good way of identifying people who are definitely not your allies. If people who think there are too many people on the planet, that is not a good thing to think. That's like something with that's got genocidal implications. I think that emerged out of the 60s as well. I think the universities had a lot to do with that. There's the left-wing tyrannical types are particularly good at manipulating guilt, and that actually works quite well on conservatives, because conservatives tend to be more conscientious. And so if you accuse a conservative of moral impropriety on the guilt front, they're likely to take that seriously. The conservative type who's conscientious is going to think, well, I'm really not perfect, and there are ways I could improve, and I could look at myself, and that's fine, because you should look at yourself. But the problem with it is that it allows the psychopathic types who are manipulative and power hungry to use use your guilt as a lever. And the left in particular, especially the radical left, and those are where the real psychopathic types hang out, they're unbelievably good at manipulating guilt. Right. And so, yeah, they're unbelievably good at it, and everybody's got something to feel guilty about, which is also something that tyrants know. If you convince young people, as we have, that the planet's going to hell in a handbasket, and that there are too many people, and that your children do nothing but produce excess carbon dioxide, and that you're contributing to the destruction of the planet, by planning to have kids, then the moral kids are going to start wondering about whether or not that's appropriate, and then the irresponsible kids have an extra reason for not doing anything that's vaguely mature. The problem with that is that, well, what the hell's the alternative? I mean, people who are alone, especially involuntarily, they just go crazy, right? Because we all need people around us to tap us into shape. That's actually how we stay sane, which is why free speech is so important, right? You can't speak freely, you can't think. And if you can't think, then you suffer. So that's the cause. No, and I don't tell young men, for example, and this is back to the issue of young men, I don't say, well, you're okay the way you are, because what the hell, what young man wants to hear that? Every young man who has any sense at all knows perfectly well that he's not okay the way he is. If he was okay the way he is, women would be flocking to him, and they're not. And the reason for that is he has a lot to learn still. Yeah. But you can say, well, you have a lot to learn. Look at you, you're a mess. You have a lot to learn. But you could learn it, and if you did, well, maybe you make something of yourself, and then there's some hope in that message, right? Because you think, well, if you just accepted people the way they are, they'd be happy. It's like, no, they wouldn't, because they have nothing to shoot for. And people who have nothing to shoot for aren't happy, because happiness actually is a consequence of moving towards something that you're aiming for. So no aim, no happiness. That's another good thing for young people to know too. If you don't have a goal, that is what technically happiness occurs when you see yourself moving towards a valued goal. That's how it works neuropsychologically. That's how it works chemically. It's an indication of progress towards a goal. So the higher your goal, the higher your possibility for happiness, even though you have to suffer from the distance.